So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are happy to have started this Tri-State Dairy Exchange webinar series. The theme for this year is around navigating the future of dairy. And so we have all of our meetings throughout the year that are going to be focused around this topic. So there's some additional information on this slide, but first we're going to start off with a little bit about this team. So you may have heard of the New England Tri-State Dairy Extension team. Our goal or our mission as a team is to advance dairy management and address shared industry challenges, including fostering innovation through collaborating on educational programs across Northern New England. For those of you who are familiar with extension programs in the three states, you may know that where a lot of us are new faces in the industry. And I think all of us joined within the last 4 to most recently the last year. So really we're trying to collaborate on programs because the dairy producers that we work with throughout the three states may share some similar challenges. And so this gives us an opportunity to just share some resources and do so in a more efficient manner. So for folks who may not be familiar with myself, my name is Glenda Pereira. I have a role here within the University of Maine Extension, predominantly as the dairy specialist. So I have a statewide responsibility here in the state of Maine. But in addition to that, I do have a teaching appointment where I teach animal genetics within our School of Food and Ag. And then I'll pass it to my colleague, Sarah.
Hi, for those that don't know me, my name is Sarah Allen. I work for the University of New Hampshire, and I am the state specialist for dairy here. I work out of the county office and kind of the middle of the state in Boscawen, and as well as on campus. So you can find me around the state, but also in those locations. We can pass it on to you, Amber.
Hey, I'm Amber Mishi. Whitney Hull and I make up the current UVM Extension dairy team. We've both been working in some capacity in Vermont's dairy industry for the past 15 to 20 years or more. Before coming to Extension, between the two of us, we've worked for Vermont Dairy Herd Improvement Association. We've worked in the AI industry in Vermont. As a dairy cattle nutrition consulting, commercial herd management, and on-farm dairy processing. Whitney works with producers across the state to provide herd management, technical advising, and specialized assistance to help folks make improvements on their operations. And I'm part of the Northwest Crops and Soils team in St. Albans, Vermont. And my day-to-day work includes on-farm dairy-related research, forage and feed management, assistance, grazing technical assistance, and climate resiliency planning for dairy farms in the northern part of the state and statewide. Whitney and I have been working together to provide education and outreach opportunities to dairy farmers and service providers for the past year or so. Like Glenda said, this Tri-State Dairy Team was established in 2021 with the goal of joining forces of the extension dairy programs and outreach across New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. Collaboration between extension folks in these states was a natural fit due to the geographical proximity. And this team has worked together to plan and facilitate workshops across our 3 states, focusing on topics including low budget milking parlors, calf management, milk quality, and biosecurity. We worked together to develop resources and educational publications, and we've been fortunate to be able to draw on each other's strengths and experiences and learn from each other as we try to serve our respective agricultural communities. This past summer, we worked together to communicate with producers and service providers about the risks of H5N1 avian influenza in dairy cattle and the biosecurity measures that can help protect our dairy farms from the spread of the disease. And as part of that effort, we developed a resource geared towards folks that were bringing dairy livestock to shows and fairs with some information about how they could minimize the risk of disease spread at those events. One hope we have for this monthly webinar series is to have the opportunity to share information about events that are happening in our respective states. Sarah, what exciting opportunities are coming up in New Hampshire?
So in March, we have a grain production farmer to farmer discussion that's happening on March 18th. And then on March 27th, we'll be bringing back the dairy seminar. Both of those events and all of Extension's events can be found at the UNH website on our Extension calendar. And so if information, as these events get started, they'll be posted on there as well.
In the state of Maine, we do have a lot of programming, but where we have focused a lot of our efforts includes in our podcast. So if you're a farmer in the state of Maine or in northern New England, because we do cover a variety of topics that may be applicable to you, we release a new episode every Wednesday, and the episodes are available on all platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever platform you listen to. In addition, we do have the dairy seminar coming up, and I want to clarify that the date is wrong on there. I must have typed it incorrectly. It's on Wednesday, March 19th, and I'm sorry for that typo.
And in Vermont, our Northwest Crops and Soils team is in about 2 weeks into facilitating nutrient management planning classes across the state. There's some really exciting updates to the GoCrop platform that folks use to complete their plans. And this course is open to all farmers and land owners who are updating their plans or need to create new plans. Whitney and I have been facilitating workshops at several locations across Vermont since last fall to connect dairy and livestock producers with information about funding opportunities and programs. This February 6th workshop will be held in Norwich, Vermont, and since it's near the Vermont-New Hampshire border, producers from New Hampshire are welcome to join us. Later in February, our team is facilitating the annual No-Till Conference in Burlington. This year's theme is building resiliency into our cropping system. And in March, our team is hosting the 2025 Organic Dairy Day at 3 locations on 3 dates. I believe one of those dates will be in White River Junction. So again, really close to the New Hampshire border. We've got a great lineup of speakers, including an agronomist, researcher, dairy nutritionist, and grazing consultant, and they'll be speaking to topics including rumen function, forage quality assessment, pasture management, and cost of production. So you can pull up our website and click on the conferences and events tab in the pull down menu and register so you can get those dates on your calendar. All right, we chose this topic to cover for our first session, hoping to bring you some timely information as you consider applying for grants. All 4 of us are available to work with your operation in navigating the grant application process. Funding from grants or programs can be super competitive, making it important to really craft an effective application that differentiates your operation and project from all of the other applicants. We've broken down our approach into a few steps to consider if applying for funding is something that's on your radar this year. You may have noticed that specific grant organizations or programs are only open for applications at certain times of the year. Some funding pools are repeated annually, and some are just one-time opportunities. If you don't have your ducks in a row, it's really easy to completely miss an application window. So if you have projects that you need to secure funding for, anytime is really a good time to connect with a service provider and start building a team that can offer support and advice. Who are service providers? Basically anyone your farm business works with. If you don't work with someone in Extension, this is a great excuse to reach out and find a good fit. But a service provider could also include any independent consultants you work with, your veterinarian, your nutritionist, your milk buyer representative, a seed or fertilizer or supply or equipment dealer, or someone who works with your conservation district. anyone you know who is an expert in their field and is someone you want to work with. If you have a project in mind, don't be afraid to ask anyone who comes to your farm. We're here to help and support you in any way we can, and oftentimes if we can't meet your needs, we can connect you with someone who has the right skill set. If a program or funding organization catches your eye, even if the specific opportunity isn't accepting applications, it's a good time to figure out how to apply when the grant opens. For example, applying for funding with the Dairy Business Innovation Center, you will need to create an account for their online application portal, WebGrants, which can be done at any time. Another thing you can do ahead of time is to start collecting information for your project. If you are looking to upgrade or replace equipment or facility components, take the time to really look into the options that are out there. Pick your top 1 or 2 choices and be able to explain why it's the best option for you and what specific benefits it will provide to your business. Something that nearly all grant and program applications will expect from you is some words that describe your operation. Before applications open is a great time to get comfortable telling your farm's story and developing a written statement that reflects what's important to you and your business. It's important to remember that the folks who are reviewing and ranking your applications likely don't know you. They've never met you, they've never been to your farm, and you only have this one chance to kind of paint a picture for them. And for some people, this can feel a little awkward and uncomfortable, but there's lots of resources out there to walk you through the process. Specifically, the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets have a couple great articles on marketing your business broken into these steps. Step 1 is to get clear on your why. Your why is your unique reason for doing what you do, your motivation for farming. Maybe you are passionate about good cows or producing food for your community, being steward of the land, or perhaps you are the next generation taking your spot in a family business. Step 2 is to define your values. This is the set of morals or guidelines by which you operate your business. It could include prioritizing animal welfare or milk quality or even just profitability. Step 3 is to develop your vision. You want to think big here. What are your hopes and dreams for the future of your business? Are you building something to pass down to your children? Do you have specific goals for how many acres you want to crop or how much milk you want to produce? If there were no barriers to the work that you do, what would success look like to you? And step 4 is to establish your mission. Your mission describes how you can make your vision a reality. So how are you going to live and manage your day-to-day tasks to build towards that future that you want? And once you do some thinking on these questions and maybe make some notes, it's time to put all these ideas into a cohesive statement. This can show up as a short paragraph or a few clear and direct statements, depending on how creative you are. All of these examples I've pulled from websites or social media platforms of farms, dairy farms. Some market direct to consumer and some don't. And you can see there's no real defined template here. Anything goes. But if you've done this work ahead of time, it makes it a whole lot easier to plug it into an application. And it can also really set the tone and guide your answers as you work through the application. And just lastly, if this process doesn't work for you, another approach is to ask people in your community, family, friends, employees, just ask them what words come to mind when they think about you or your business. Ask them for 3 descriptive words and use that feedback from them to develop a statement that resonates with you.
Alrighty, so after you've done the pre-work before the application opens, or you're considering applying for a grant and the application's already opened, one doesn't have to happen before the other. But now you're going to want to review what are the requirements for the application. Some folks sometimes refer to it as an RFA or an RFQ, and those mean a request for application or request for, I can't remember the Q now. Is it questions
I think it's RFP.
Qualifications. Thank you. Somebody in the chat said it. I had a brain fart, so thank you for that. But all that entails is that the grant funders have designated, you know, a packet of things that they would like from you as a submission for the grant. This is in addition to what they will use to evaluate your grant as well, right? So if folks have applied to grants before, there's usually a checklist that goes along with your request for application, and what it's stating is, you know, you need these 3 things in order for it to be considered a good application. So making sure that you check that checklist that a lot of folks have and review the rubric is a really good way for you to know that, yes, I've met all the qualifications, I've met all the requirements, and it can be considered for an application. Folks sometimes get to almost the finish line, but they miss one thing that was a requirement on their application. And sometimes that's, you know, unfortunately a way that your project may not get funded because of the, you know, you missed one thing that was a requirement. So reach out to us. We are happy to review your applications to make sure that you've met all the requirements. Obviously, give us some time before the submission so that we can, you know, make time to review that. But of course, there's always webinars that you can attend. A lot of the grant funders are there to support you so that you can have a successful submission. So reach out to those folks as resources, because at the end of the day, while Amber, Whitney, Sarah, and I are a resource, we unfortunately don't disperse grants and aren't the grant funders. So we oftentimes lean on you know, reaching out to the grant funder and saying, hey, can you clarify this or that, so that I can better help this person with their grant submission. One of the things that a lot of grants require is obviously quotes. So you'll want to start working on requesting information from people on your team and even vendors or suppliers early, because those may take time. You want to request letters of support or letters of commitment or intent. And letters of support are different than letters of intent or commitment. A letter of support is often something that a, you know, community member might write for you, or somebody who benefits from your project might write for you saying that, yes, you know, I really want this farm to get this, you know, ask in the grant. And you know, we're excited for this. Whereas a letter of commitment or intent is different in that the person who's writing it for you is going to commit a service, or they're going to help you with some part of your project, whether that's a project partner or even some of your ag service providers. You know, we can write a letter of commitment or intent if we have capacity. For a project where it entails, you know, you have to do a field day. And so we're happy to write a letter of intent saying, I will help the person run the field day, you know, do the registration, blah, 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 so that this project submission can be more successful. So make sure that you understand that some require letters of support and letters of commitment. And then something that we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides is a lot of times the reporting in the grant proposal wants outcomes or expectations or metrics. And that often involves, you know, an economic evaluation or analysis. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but it certainly has to demonstrate that if you are going to purchase something for your farm, it is going to have a return on investment and really support your dairy business overall. And lastly, you'll want to prepare your application ahead of time, and you know, maybe using Google Docs or handwritten paper is a great way to prepare this ahead of time, and having that you know, handy, so then you can work on the application as you go. For example, some applications open early and you can upload information and save it. And I find that that's the way it works best for farmers, because you don't have 2 to 3, 4 hours every day to, you know, work on this. So a lot of submission forms allow you to work as you go. So then you're inputting some information here and there, but then you're finishing the application as a whole. And again, like I said, reach out to us and other ag service providers that can review that application for you. So now we're going to go into what I talked a little bit about, understanding what that request for applications or request for qualifications entails. And I mentioned that there are checklists available, but what I like to really look at is how will the grant be evaluated? So, I can write about cats and dogs all I want in the grant, and how, this product is great. But if the project says, we need to have for example, in our review score criteria here on the right-hand side from the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, we're talking about dairy operations. Well, I failed, and I'm not going to get 15 points because I'm talking about cats and dogs, right? So it's important that we follow the guidelines, because when the reviewers are looking at your packet, they're going to use this to evaluate your packet and whether it ranks higher than other submissions. So it's important that we know what the target and what the goals are ahead of time so that we can have a planned approach to writing our grant and making sure that we're including everything that's going to be evaluated. So on the left-hand side here, I pulled the farmer grants that Northeast SARE has and how they evaluate so these are the rubrics for how they evaluate your submission once you hand it in. These are available with the request for proposal applications and qualifications. So you can take a screenshot if you'd like, but definitely work with your service provider or review these ahead of time so you know what you want to focus on. In addition, I mentioned that a lot of applications require you to show some type of outcome or expectation or return on investment. And I have an example here. So a lot of times, because we're dealing with a dairy operation, we look at milk production, right? Input to output. So if I improve this one thing with this grant, doesn't matter what it is, it's likely that I'll see some benefit, and a metric that's really easy to use is milk production. So all we're saying is, I know that if I implement this one management strategy that's going to come from the funding of this grant that I'm applying for, I'm able to measure that. So right now, I need to think about, okay, what are my current numbers? And then after the project completion, what are the numbers then? So for example, if I'm wanting to implement a robot feed pusher in my barn, there's research and data that exists saying that consistent feeding practices and good management for feeding practices can help increase milk production per cow by 3 to 5%. And so I had the research study that indicated that. So if right now my current milk per cow per day is 50 pounds, we can expect to see, let's be conservative on the 3% side. We can expect to see a 1.5 pound increase per cow per day. So that's really an easy way to evaluate how this, implementation of whatever you're asking for on your farm is going to really improve your bottom line. This also applies to anything related to dairy storage and handling, right? If you're unable to currently control the temperature in any of your pipelines or in your bulk tank, if your milk quality isn't, to the range or to the standards and benchmarks to meet the pasteurized milk ordinance or your personal benchmark, those are ways that we can quantify how we will really improve our farm and our business because of this one small thing that we're implementing, right? It has big impact and a big return on your investment. In addition, I always recommend citing where you found this source, because just saying, hey, I think magic, Dave Marcinkowski here says, magic milk. We just kind of, we do this one thing and it improves magically. But there's a lot of research stating that this actually does happen and we can put numbers behind it. So I just always recommend linking that as well. And doing a Google search is your best way to do this, or of course, reaching out to us and we can lead you in the right direction.
All right, so now you've told your farm story, you've decided, what you're going to apply for, you've written that up, and you think you're ready to submit. There's still a couple of steps that I always recommend just to make sure that your application is as complete as possible before you press that submit button. And they're pretty basics. The first one is just actually review the grant. A lot of times if you're going through and, putting in information throughout a couple of weeks, here and there, you may change some of your numbers a little bit throughout, or you may change some of the project. Make sure that you go through and that you're proofreading and that everything is consistent and that it, flows and all of your information stays consistent throughout the grant process. It's a good idea to have somebody else take a look at your grant. So whoever is your technical service provider, somebody maybe that hasn't been a part of it can also take a look at it and just see how well it flows, how well a reviewer would interpret it. And make sure that you're catching typos, small errors, things that seem really simple, and they seem really small and like someone could overview them, but they do detract from your grant. And as we mentioned earlier, some of these grants are very competitive, and so you don't want to have anything in your grant submission that might detract from your project. Make sure that you have all of your documentation actually attached and in the right format. Don't be panicking at the last minute trying to figure out whether or not you have that second letter of support that you need. Some grants require both letters of support and letters of commitment. One of those. Some of them may require a letter from your milk cooperative. They may require letters from customers. Make sure that you have all of those gathered and attached before you press submit, because if you don't have those minimum requirements, then your grant can't even be considered. And so you've done all of that work and forgot one piece, and now you can't, you don't even qualify. And submit it before the deadline, if at all possible. And check your deadline times. For instance, the NEDBIC grants are usually due at 2 p.m. And I've had farms, miss deadlines because they thought it was later. And so just make sure that you have checked those deadlines and that you have them at the right time, and submit them well in advance. Sometimes services, go out. We are in rural parts of the state, and so we don't always have the best internet access. Just make sure that you're not missing a deadline for something like that. So the budget is usually the trickiest part of the grant. And so make sure that you spend some time and try and make sure that this budget looks correct. The first thing that you can do once you get, your budget put together is review the grant requirements as well. Some grants are going to require that a specific percentage of your budget has to be dedicated to a specific area. So make sure that you've met that. If the grant requires a match, make sure that you've met that match. So go through and review your budget, work with somebody else to review your budget and make sure that everything is lined up in here correctly. Again, this isn't something that will automatically disqualify you at some point, but if a reviewer is looking at your grant and doesn't think that your budget meets the requirements of it, even if it does, if it's not laid out correctly, that can detract from your grant. And for very competitive grants, we want to avoid doing that at all cost. If you have a match requirement, also make sure that you know the difference between the in-kind match and the cash match, because those are usually split up in a budget. A cash match is usually funds that you're putting forth. It can be some other grant funds, depending on the grant that you're applying for. Things that you're physically spending money on, sometimes it's labor, those go towards the cash match, but there are also in-kind donations that could be consultants donating their time, groups donating equipment, anything like that that you're not physically paying for can go into the in-kind. But different grants will also split these out a little bit differently. And so just make sure that you have reviewed the grant requirements and that your budget aligns with that particular grant. And small things as well, make sure that your math is correct. Make sure that these numbers actually match up to your quotes that you submitted or that you attached. Small things like that, small inconsistencies, really can make it hard on a reviewer to know what your project is. And so some small errors that, are pretty common and are really easy to make Usually you've done your budget, but now you have your budget narrative, and you really need to make sure that those two areas match up. One very common issue is that, again, you've gone through this grant process, you've maybe spent a couple of weeks, and maybe some of those numbers have changed. And you wrote your budget narrative for the budget that you originally had, but maybe you changed a number and you didn't change it in the budget narrative. That's really hard for a reviewer to go through and look at that because they don't know what you're actually applying for. So take a second, take that extra, a little bit of time, and make sure that you are adding up your budget narrative, and that those two numbers match together. Make sure, again, that you've met all of your budget requirements within that budget narrative as well. These things have to match. They have to meet the requirements. And similarly to the example that Glenda showed earlier with, different, with the response in milk production, if you put a number on your grant, make sure that you can back it up. Make sure that you have explained where that number comes from. So if you say that you are going to have a match of $2,000 to help install the equipment, where did that $2,000 come from? Is it put the number of employees, the number of hours, and what their hourly rate is to explain that number. One of the issues that some people get into a trap with is they say, okay, well, I have $4,000 that we're going to match up with. Where did that money come from? Same thing with any of your expected results. Those need to be consistent throughout the grant. So if you say that you expect a 3 to 5% increase in milk yield, and then you get to the end, make sure that if you chose to use the conservative number of a 3% increase in milk yield, it's that 3% throughout the entire grant. Make sure that you didn't add up 3% and then 4.5% and then 5%. Those small inconsistencies make it really tricky for a reviewer to, again, just know where your numbers come from, be able to show your work, and show that those numbers didn't just appear out of thin air. We had, a mechanism for how we got that number. So one way, to make sure that you're staying on top of everything is to try and stay informed on what grants are happening. Grants are usually coming around throughout the entire year, and it can be really frustrating if you miss them, or if you find out last minute, you just don't have time to write the grant. So in New Hampshire, some of the ways that you can find out about the grants are through Weekly Market Bulletin. We'll sometimes post them. UNH Extension newsletters, the Dairy, Livestock, and Forage newsletter, and the Extension Ag Update usually have different grants posted on them. And then individual organizations like NOFA New Hampshire will post about their grants. Glenda, what about Maine?
Yeah, so we have a monthly newsletter called the Humane Livestock and Forage newsletter that folks can subscribe to. It includes much more information than just upcoming grants, but it's a great resource to know what's upcoming. We do have a Humane New Farmers Project team here, and those folks have a lot of resources put together all in one place in one website, because their main focus is working with new farmers, and so new farmers may rely on grant funding to establish their operation. And then the Maine Department of Ag is also a great resource for finding out about funding opportunities.
And in Vermont, both Ag Review and the Vermont Ag Bulletin are publications produced by the Vermont Agency of Agriculture and sent out by email on a regular basis. So you can subscribe on the agency website. And that website also has a pretty user-friendly funding calendar page, which breaks down some of the opportunities into the month of the year that they are expected to be open, provides some links to each as well as contact information if you have any questions. The UVM Extension Dairy Update is distributed by Whitney monthly by email, and it's packed full of dairy-specific information. So you can email Whitney directly to get added to that list. Both NOFA VT and the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center have newsletters that are easy to navigate websites and social media platforms where they share a ton of information. And available through the UVM Extension Northwest Crops and Soils website main page, we have an updated 2025 guide that outlines many of the funding organizations and opportunities for dairy and crop operations.
Right. And that's our portion of this, and we'd like to open it up for any questions. So feel free to unmute or to write your question in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them for you. Nobody's got any questions. That's pretty easy for us.
Sarah and Amber, I have a question for you to kick things off. So, I'm an interested farmer in applying for a future grant, and I'm coming to you as resources to get that process started. What does that look like, and what are some pieces of information that are useful to you so you can help me?
So for me, if you are looking for me to help you with a grant, my one request is that you come to me early enough that I can at least make sure that I've built my schedule around that. For a lot of these grants, I try and block off a lot of time, but as these grants become more popular, it gets a little bit tricky. So make sure that you come early enough. Otherwise, I might not be able to help you as much. Usually, I'm going to sit down with you in person and walk through the grant process. Make sure that you've got an account with the grant, go through your project, whether or not there's any issues. Sometimes we have questions over whether those, something that you're purchasing is going to qualify, and we may have to get the grant agency on board. But I like to kind of have that first conversation in person, if at all possible, just so that we can look at the grant together and we're not just doing it on the phone. And then from there, I'm usually helping you, kind of virtually back and forth a little bit. If you can, I'll send you kind of a list of here's the things that you need to get gathered. Here's some of the details that might help you with your like milk production records or anything like that. If you can go and get those things together, then, we'll kind of start looking at how you build that grant from there. But that's usually the first point. Oh, we have a question, and Amber, I think that this one was from your section. So it says, an earlier slide showed examples of farm missions and visions as displayed on their websites. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between mission and vision? I think of vision as what you'd like to see and mission as what your farm and company does to get there, but I don't know if you have any better way of phrasing it.
Sorry about that. Sure. I think that the big difference here, your vision is really a big picture of what you want your future to look like. And the way I explain it and understand it is your mission is the actual how, like the steps you're going to take to make that future happen. I don't think necessarily you need to spell them out separately, but you can think of them with that difference. And then when you are coming together with like a full statement, you can either keep them separate or you can put them into a sentence. Like, our vision here for the future of our farm is to accomplish X. We want to create a profitable business that we can pass down to the next generation. Our mission, the how we're going to get there, is by making fiscally responsible choices, being good stewards of the land, employing precision feeding technology to improve production. So the vision is the what for the future. The mission is the steps you're going to take to get there. Does that answer your question? You're welcome.
Are there any more questions? All right, well, like we mentioned earlier, this webinar series is going to take place on the last Wednesday of every month. So our next webinar is going to be on February 26th. and we'll be talking about the Ben & Jerry's low carbon dairy program. Rebecca Manning is the program coordinator for that, and Ben & Jerry's has been working on a 3-year pilot program with 7 farms in northwestern Vermont, with the focus of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So please feel free to join us for that webinar on February 26th. If you, like I said, if you're not on your phone right now, you can scan the QR code if you still need to register for this. And with that, I believe that that is all for today. Thank you very much for joining, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.